and we believe that we'll be discussing the topic tax reform. Will middle class evolve in Ukraine? Because many people, entrepreneurs, owners of business, were requiring changes, and these active people demand reforms. Because and we will be talking today with our experts about whether Ukraine will manage to do that, and Natalya Kononeko will be a moderator of our discussion. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear guests, all the guests who are here at the table and who are in the audience. We will discuss it for 90 minutes. We're also waiting for the first Deputy Finance Minister, Igor Umanskyi. I will introduce our guest. Andriy is one of the heads of the Civic Initiative, the first professional government. Next to Andriy, Valeriy Pekar, New Country NGO, and Oleksandr Kirsh from the People's Front, Oksana, Prodan, Petro, Poroshenko, Blonde, Andriy, Zhurzhiy, Samopomich, economist, Iryna, Klimenko. What did I say? Sorry. And Doctor of Economics, Iryna Klimenko, and Volodymyr Dubrovskyi, who represents CASE today in our discussion. For me, as for citizen, as for researcher, the tax policy, I believe that the tax policy is an instrument of social policy which is implemented by the state.
And the tax policy is a part of a social policy that is being realized by the state, and the social structure of the country depends very much on it, and also what we will get in 5 or 10 years. So before we proceed to the issue about the yardsticks of the tax policy in the coalition agreement and how this will touch upon the process of formation of the middle class in Ukraine, I'll ask for the retrospective review of our colleagues in countries of Eastern and Central Europe. I hope that every panelist has something to say in this respect. First, Iryna Klimenko, what were the steps by the governments of countries that were modernized in the 1990s and the beginning of 2000s in order to get the middle class form in this country? Thank you very much. And when we were talking to organizers about the idea of this event, I suggested that we provide a brief outlook about how the tax system was reformed in the countries that were going away from the socialist model and were introducing the tools of market economy. Everything started somewhere in mid-1980s, and in fact, by the time when Ukraine declared market economy, a lot of Eastern European countries have already reformed their taxation systems according to the laws of market economy, although we did start from almost similar levels, but there were no classical taxes in those countries, same as in Ukraine. But by the beginning of 1990s, In most countries of Eastern Europe, the taxation systems were already formed with VAT, with the income tax and profit tax and excise and duties, and social payments were already in place. Also the property tax. Our moderator said that you have to regard the taxation system having in mind its social function. But first of all, I'd like you to have a look at the state-wide functions of taxation systems. And of course, the governments of those countries have set much more large-scale tasks. First of all, the major problem faced by the governments was the problem of finding a balance between regulatory and fiscal functions of taxation system. And in many countries where new taxes were introduced, we saw that there was less tax collected. There was everywhere the decrease in income in state revenues. Of course, there were differences in many countries, but anyway, they were looking for balances, and in a couple of years they were coming to a more or less stable level of taxes, and the same happened in Ukraine. Ukraine took this model of major taxes, and by the beginning of the year 2000, the taxation system became more or less understood in the way we have it now, in the form we have it now. Another problem was the problem of harmonization of tax systems with the legislation of European Union, because most of the countries of Eastern Europe were setting for themselves a aim of joining the European Union. So those countries, in spite of their unique conditions and unique economic systems, had to harmonize their economic and tax systems with the legislation of the European Union. And of course, a special kind of taxes in those countries were the taxes levied on small and medium-sized businesses. And of course, this group of entrepreneurs deserved and got special attention from the countries that were reforming their systems. And the European Union recognized that small and medium-sized business is a basis for the development of the economies and competitiveness of market economies in the modern world. And the major tools that the Eastern European countries were using in regulating their tax legislation was holidays, tax payment holidays, or the opportunity to choose whether you pay VAT or you do not pay VAT. We know that Ukraine went along the same lines with some differences, of course. Tax benefits were introduced for newly created small enterprises. There were special tax regimes for medium-sized businesses, simplified regimes of taxation, simplified accountability systems, accountant systems, and as a rule, small and medium-sized enterprises had an opportunity to have a beneficial regime. This is about small and medium-sized enterprises, but there were other problems that were solved during the reform of taxation. The countries had to provide for the sufficient level of social payments and collection from pension insurance, and all other insurance payments had to be enough so that countries could finance their social obligations. Another important issue was to provide for the beneficial investment climate, because all the countries were competitors between themselves, and to involve as much foreign investment as possible. We will pass on the word to other people in a minute. In order to conclude, I would like to sum up by saying that in the reformation of the taxation system, you have to take into account a gamut of problems of development that are very complicated, and every country went along their own way when they were choosing the levels of taxation that could stimulate the development of this country. When we are talking about small business, I would say that we have to focus on the formation of the space of development for small business. And of course, the taxation here is not a sole instrument. In European Union, you have the European Charter of Small Enterprises, where they collected the main priorities of the development of this sector of economy. And the Ukrainian state has a special decree of the president that introduces such a charter as a document that has to be regulate this sector of economy. And maybe we should also have, the public that protects the interests of small and medium-sized enterprises pay attention to this. It is, hard to swim against the flow when there always will be a more important problem, like paying pensions or, for instance, financing disabled people. And when the country loses, and we are losing now tax revenue, it is very difficult to raise the question about socially oriented taxes and some benefits. I think that it is better to concentrate your attention on the broadening of the space of development. I would make one authoritarian step, and then everybody will be able to join the discussion. So the floor is given to Volodymyr Dubrovskyi. Iryna has formulated the vector of discussion in this respect: the development of small and medium-sized businesses, social taxation function of the state, and of course the way of the countries that have gone from planned economy and post-totalitarian to free market. I'd like to start with definition, what we understand when we talk about middle class. There's a lot of definitions there, and I would say that for us the most urgent is, as they say in America, the plumber Joe, a self-sufficient person who has a human capital of their own, skills and abilities, and sometimes they also have a small capital of their own. This makes them relatively independent. Otherwise, they depend on their employer, and they are easily replaceable. Many rich people are to an extent slaves of their wealth, because in order to magnify it, they have to resort to some political compromises, and the middle class becomes an engine of transformations, because on the one hand they understand what is their own dignity, and they have some resources that they can invest in order to fight for their dignity. On the other hand, they have a stimulus to fight for the and those opportunities are limited. What is the problem of our middle class? Because a very huge proportion of our people who could be classified as middle class were completely dependent in their times. In 1997, when I worked in Den newspaper with Vitaly Knezhansky, I visited Natalya, who then was an outstanding activist of protecting the business, and she still is. And there were two people of my age, Ksenia and Dmitro Lapin. We talked about change in the country, and they said we have to create 3 million people who won't be dependent on the authorities every day. How do we do this? We do this by introducing simplified taxation, because at that moment our plumbers' jaw were inspected every day. They were prone to giving bribes, and they were not able to carry accountants' books. And of course, Ksenia and Oleksandra Kuzhel and Oksana was very young at the moment, very young, not such a outstanding figure. They did introduce this simplified system, and the simplified system became, to a certain extent, an example of how the taxation system should work, because it was due to it when the entrepreneurs got the opportunity to pay taxes, to be absolutely honest and conduct their business still. But the main thing was that the decree was composed in a way that the fines were impossible. There were almost no grounds for fining the enterprises, and of course the entrepreneur who works according to a simplified system is not even acquainted with the tax officer. The task then was posed as taking this to a transition point. At the moment, I do not represent Case Ukraine, but the reanimation package of reforms on tax reform, and we are still fighting in order to create a general taxation system along the same lines. As far as I understand, the main principle for the taxation system to be favorable to the middle class is not even provision of benefits, because I emphasize that the simplified system that later probably transformed itself into a offshore, it was built initially on the compromise. We will pay more, but we won't pay bribes. And the payments from the middle class grew sixfold, and 200 hryvnia that we are talking now as some petty money were higher than an average salary there. There was, however, a mistake there. We should have introduced indexation into contributions in order to preclude it from transforming into offshore. The small business does not need an offshore zone. They do not need a benefit system where they always are indebted to someone, to pensioners, for instance. They need a very transparent, a very simple system that does not require additional expenditure for accountants, and the main thing is that they won't be able to be fined at someone's will. But of course, this system also is needed by the big business. And I'm coming to my last sentence. In reality, what is needed to create a middle class in the business and as qualified workers in medium and big-sized business, the way to this is only one: to create a taxation system that has the same features as the simplified system. And another small remark: for the person who works in big business to feel themselves representatives of middle class, then people should have their own dignity. The system in big business should not be authoritarian, not based on some shadow bandit schemes. And it is needed that the big business works in the same system. Otherwise, there will be a vertical, because the official, if they command the businessman, then the businessman becomes a boss for their subordinates. I'll try to sharpen a bit. In my last book, in his last book, Francis Fukuyama, maybe number one in political science and finance in the world, having analyzed almost 5,000 years of statehood on this planet, came to the conclusion that fiscal crisis always precedes or is at the beginning of the state crisis. It starts with when the taxes are being stopped, because the taxation system does not correspond to the economic system. 5,000 years from China to Rome, to the Great French Revolution, to modern Ukraine, the decline of the state starts with the decline of taxation system. We are now trying to repair our taxation system, and there are several very good proposals in the coalition agreement about the repair of taxation system, but in reality it will only lead to some temporary renewal of balances, but not for the entire Ukrainian economy. What we have, the taxation system does not stimulate economical development, entrepreneurship, or creation of new jobs. On the other hand, it does stimulate corruption. It is very complicated. As of 2014 index of doing business of the World Bank, Ukraine holds number 104 as far as the complexity of accountants' books is concerned. So I think that our place there is one of the last. As the index of economic freedom of Heritage Foundation, Ukraine is 125th. We have joined the countries with repressed economy, and our neighbors are Haiti and Northern Korea, and Ukraine is the only normal country on this list. As of today, we came to the situation when we redistribute through the budget 54% of GDP, which is normal for very rich countries, which is 20% higher than the countries much richer than Ukraine can allow themselves. For instance, for the countries of Central and Eastern Europe mentioned today, 37% is maximum what they can allow themselves to redistribute through the budget of GDP. I remind you that we have 54%. Of course, with the help of progressive democratic political forces that won the victory in the parliament, we will change this system, we will repair it, but this will be a temporary restoration of the balance. We have to change it completely for it to stimulate the entrepreneurship and the investment will be very simple and fill the budget. There are several very important points and contradictions.
The first contradiction, we need to do it very quickly, but the tax system doesn't like any quick movements. It needs everything to be thought of several months before the beginning of the tax period. We don't have this chance, and I believe that we need to change something in December so that from the 1st of September the entrepreneurs can start working according to new process. The second contradiction is the contradiction between the movement towards reforming economy, but the Ministry of Finance is still the ministry which, from the point of view of philosophy, sets the last position in the rating of normality. It hampers all the reforms which are taking place in Ukraine and will continue to hamper these reforms because the ministry is designed for that, basically, and I will explain why. And third important contradiction is that one of the main problems of the tax system is a big burden on the wages fund, and at the same time the pension reform is absolutely separate section. When they talk about tax reform, they don't touch upon pension reform, and that means that such comprehensive reforms which cover several spheres will be delayed, and we will have this problem for many years ahead. What is the main thing today? The change of the philosophy of the system. We have such and such public expenditures, and let's think about how to cover these expenditures by tax revenues. We lack something, let's increase something. If we lack a lot, then we'll start printing money. But in fact, if we look at that from the point of view of economy but not finance, the priorities should be different. We need to look at what are the levels of tax burden that Ukrainian economy can afford so that Ukrainian companies are competitive, at least in one sector. And then we need to look at what public expenditures we can afford. I will not mention the article of 5 very famous economists of the late Bendukidze, Osland, Kilimon, Gavrilyshin, and Gemaglu, which says about how the public expenditures could be cut by 20%, and taxation should be cut by 20%. Iryna mentioned that Ukraine is following the way of the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, and yes, I agree. That's the same way, but in opposite direction. They are increasing the share of small and medium-sized business in Ukraine to the level of 40, 60, and we're reducing the share of small and medium business to the level of not more than 10%. And that is not just financial problem. Small business is never considered as the source of taxation, but first of all as a source of employment. We have the problem of employment, the social problems in many regions. Now we have problems in about how to reintegrate Donbass and Crimea, and we will not do it unless we change the philosophy of approaching tax system. I understand that we are moving towards the second question in our round table. We believe that the experience of the countries which are more successful than Ukraine, and they had reforms, including tax reforms. We have discussed that. If you want to add anything, you can do it in the beginning of the second panel, but let us start our discussion from how to take Ukrainian business onto the light, the small, the medium, and large business. Preparing for this round table, I opened the newspaper Дзеркало Тижня, and it says it has the information that 70% of wages in Ukraine are paid to people in envelopes, and that is a characteristic feature of enterprises of any form of ownership. It's more characteristic for small and medium-sized businesses. Less so we see it in large companies. If this is the situation, then I understand people do it not because it's easy for them to live. There are certain restrictions for companies that manufacture products for Ukrainian market and sell it in Ukrainian market, and they have to use such services, which we call the tax pits, and we are trying to get rid of them. When we read the text of coalition agreement, we see that all these things are declared, but we don't see any terms of implementing the steps which are directed towards taking small and medium-sized business out of the shadow. But in other sections of the tax agreement, which of coalition agreement, which are about anti-corruption reform, the terms of approval, the decisions by parliament and government are very clearly stated. And we have quite a difficult situation. On the one hand, business doesn't understand when it gets the things that it counts for from authorities, but on the other hand, we understand that the authorities will have to exercise certain to fulfill certain commitments given to the donors and implement anti-corruption reform. And I believe everyone understands that small business, medium-sized business is concerned that the main corruptionist in the country could be small and medium-sized business. And it's basically about survival of that business, of that part of Ukrainian society. I believe that we should start from the representatives of parliament who have been working on these things for the last 2-3 weeks. Okay, so now talking about gender equality. The first one, Oksana Prodan. Thank you. Good afternoon. In fact, I will start from whether there will be a middle class. We do have middle class. If we didn't have a middle class, we wouldn't have Orange Revolution, we wouldn't have the Revolution of Dignity, and we wouldn't have the simplified system which is operating. And that is the system that middle class defended in 2010 when they were protesting for the ability to work in non-corruption environment. And basically those who care about the future of economy. For all of us, our task is to preserve what we have, to preserve all these representatives of middle class and give the chance for development of the middle class. Because unfortunately, if we look at statistical information, those people who can consider themselves to be middle class, we have less of them now than 5 years ago. And the task today is not to stimulate. The task of tax system today is not to press and not to put obstacles in work. The system is created by any state to ensure that there are revenues coming to the budget and that social payments are paid. But our task is to change the tax system so that it does not hamper the development of the business and development of the economy. And in coalition agreement on which we've been working, basically we met with Andriy when working on coalition agreement that everyone saw last week. We did everything to put this position of the future majority in the parliament and to remove all possible mechanisms of fiscal pressure, including on business. There are no time frame. There's no time frame. It was my mistake. We have introduced that. As to taxation, it's either the fourth quarter of 2014 or 2015 that had to be ready already. And I would like to say a few words about the direction of the coalition agreement. One thing is legalizing the revenues of physical persons, and for the first time in the official documents, we declared that there is need to reduce the fiscal pressure. I will not continue on that, and I would like to say that all political forces who are ready to sign the coalition agreement, and these are constitutional majority of the future parliament, are ready to support real reduction of the fiscal pressure on physical persons. Another direction, another section of coalition agreement is to preserve the simplified system which exists today. It's very important because there are many different positions. This position that the simplified system is sort of a mechanism of taking the money outside of legal sector. But back in 2010, I managed to convince even the government of Azarov that the payers of simplified system pay more to the budget than those who pay according to general system of taxation. We need to have this simplified system until the time we have non-corrupt and easier system of taxation. Also, the tax system should become not punitive system, but it should be helping business. It should not be just that the representative of the state are to be responsible for business, and one of big directions of development, and it's about all the taxes which we have is liquidation of corruption component in administering taxes. I am happy to say, and everyone who read the coalition agreement knows that, and that is the cancellation of special accounts. And the fourth quarter of 2014, we will have a month for the law to be passed, and this draft law is ready. And I believe that Andriy and Oleksandr Viktorovich will be the co-authors of this draft law. And the first days of the work of Verkhovna Rada, it will be submitted for consideration. Just as the draft law on canceling the special accounts on VAT, we have other draft laws, and that's on reduce simplification of administering many taxes, on cash apparatus and cash machines, and responsibility of civil servants as well. And our task is to have these draft laws voted for in the parliament, so that tomorrow business can start operating. The task of the tax system is, yes, to ensure that there are revenues coming to the budget, but all in such a way that it does not hamper business in its work. Thank you. I cannot but ask. I've heard that there will be no electronic tax documents. Yeah, that's in the. There will be no electronic. No, there will be no special accounts. And you mentioned that this step will be made till the end of 2014. Is there understanding about when will the parliamentary majority be able to reduce the single social tax? Talking about the special accounts, they were passed together with the law on ensuring financing of the army. And then the government submitted draft laws about financing the army in the East and in general financing of the army. And one of the requirements of the Prime Minister was voting for these special accounts. And their initiative was to introduce these special accounts from the 1st of November. We insisted on the 1st of January, and also until the 1st of January we have to settle, regulate and change the system so that it can operate and so that it does not hamper business, so that it actually combats all the schemes and pits. There was only one draft law on VAT special accounts that was proposed by the Ministry of Finance, and it did not address any problems that are in the law. And the only mechanism, the only possible mechanism is to cancel these special accounts. There are 5 political forces who are ready to cancel them, and we believe that it should be done in the 4th quarter of 2014, because if we do not cancel it now, then all the business will stop, and we cannot afford it. Then there's another part of it. Without reducing the rate of a single social contribution, the revenues, incomes will not come out of the shadow, because all these taxes are not paid because people do not want to pay them. They are not paid because they are not competitive in the market of goods and services. The price is formed not by the Ministry of Finance. The price all over the world is formed by the market, and when the market sets the price, our single contribution and another tax makes business non-compatible, and our draft law about 18% of single social contribution is ready. We have the initiatives on how to correctly what should be done to single contribution correctly. And the 1st quarter of we believe that we will have a decision on reducing the fiscal burden not later than 1st quarter of 2015 without any additional requirements. 2015 we still work in accordance with the existing paradigm. I don't think that in the 4th quarter of 2014 the single social contribution could be reduced. I hope this will be done, but the 2nd quarter, we do have chances that the fiscal burden will be reduced. May I explain? The issue of protecting the simplified system is very much related to the issue of the general tax system. The main accusation of the simplified system is that it is used to avoid the income tax and the single social contribution. You can pay, the company can pay 5% and will not pay 18% of profit tax and 36% of single social contribution, SSC. There are companies that use it, but we need to do it so that there are no possibilities to avoid taxation left. We have the recipe of how this could be done. And secondly, to reduce, maybe twice reduce the tax on wages, so-called SSC, and the ones, those who are making the contribution, they need to understand that the state per 1 hryvnia of this contribution pays so much. then people will be interested in participating in this system, but not getting this money as a private interpreter without any social guarantees. So the issue of preserving and improving the simplified system cannot be resolved once and forever without reforming the general tax system. We are sure that one of the tasks of the tax reform is taking economy out of the shadow. Talking to the entrepreneurs, we see that the business is ready to pay taxes, pay to the budget, so that the people are not afraid that every new people who come, they say, what have you been doing then? And we believe this legalization will not happen until we resolve the issue of burden on a wages fund, because very often business needs these resources. Now, this burden on wages fund is up to 60%. We need not just to look at SSC. We can call it whatever, but suggesting this or that reform, we need to look at what is the general burden on the wage that we want to take out of the shadow. We had 13% of the pension fund tax and so on, but nothing was done to SSC. So we need to calculate with the SSC 18%. That's a very good step, very good for business. We need to understand that for this 2,000 grivnas that are paid in envelope, business has to add 18% of SSF, 15 of another 3.6 and 1.5 for defense. And we get about 40% burden on the wage. And we need to understand that in such conditions, not all business will be able to become transparent. I like the example of Georgia, which after the war, implementing the reforms, introduced the single rate. It was 26 and 6, then it was 25 and then 20, and they collected 3 times more taxes. We cannot say that so much money was invested into the economy of Georgia. That was because the base was expanded. But every government that comes says, let's increase the taxes. Maybe we'll be expanding the base. You say 70% in the shadow. But the problem is that not a single government, we actually, and we do not know how much is in the shadow realistically. And the decision, if the decision which is made is wrong, then the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance will be afraid to have a hole in the budget. We need to find some solution, some decision, which when the burden on wages fund is reduced will allow the budget not to lose revenues and to expand the base. We need to find a compromise or in the fourth quarter of 2014. We want it to happen, but we need to understand that we cannot be mistaken. That is one of the priority decisions in the tax reforms, because this will allow business to get legalized. But it should work for the result that we hope we will get. A small remark. And then I will invite Alexander Kirsh. And the status of the situation. The situation as I see it, I understand that the coalition is in search of tax solution. On the other hand, I understand that the course is declared which is closed, which is related to closing tax pits. On the other hand, Oksana mentioned that there are objective grounds which allow us to understand that introducing amendments, that the amendments to the laws will be introduced in the beginning of 2015. Can you give advice to people who work today in real economy, how they can survive 2014, 2015, when the authorities will be will be eliminating the corruption schemes, but on the other hand, small business and medium system which manufactures products, which sells the products in the domestic market, but pays the taxes according to Ukrainian legislation, how this business will survive in this situation. Sorry. I will add one more thing to my question. I understand that everyone understands what it is about, but the subject of interrelations between business and the state are fiscal and law enforcement bodies, and they're very active. The second reform after the reform of education is anti-corruption reform. But tax reform has not been started. How should business survive in 2015 with the anti-corruption reform which is being implemented, but in situation when tax reform is not implemented? All the time we forget about the principle of stability of tax legislation. I would like to emphasize how to survive. Business has been surviving and it knows better than we do. Unfortunately, it knows better than we do. I'm convinced that we shouldn't be mistaken with the decisions or solutions that we suggest. They probably will not be just for immediate future. They will work in a month, but we cannot afford changing rules of game every month. In summer, in 2 months, with 3 times we're changing the rules of taxation. How can business operate in these conditions? When we say first go right, then go left. And when we are talking about the decrease of the rate on the salary fund, but this should we need to do so that we stimulate taking incomes out of the shadow. First, what we were talking about this year, we are planning to cancel special accounts on VAT. That's important. And also, I hope that the new parliament will vote for tax compromise, which is included into coalition agreement, which will reduce the activity of tax controlling bodies. They were forcing business to work according to tax schemes, but I believe that the law will be passed this year, and from the 1st of January we'll have this tax compromise, and it will protect business from controlling corruptionists. Then anti-corruption legislation will become effective partially from the 1st of January. Very often the tax pressure and the tax of controllers has a lot of corruption component, a big corruption component in it. And one more block, which is in coalition agreement in different parts of it, and and I understand it very well as my colleagues. The controllers operate according to what government allows them to do. There are 3 MPs of the future parliament, and we will be doing everything possible not to allow them to exceed their powers. The tax controllers. From my experience, the requests of the MPs, they work. And when control applies some illegal measures to business, when business finds the MP who looks for the head of the business, that stops violations of legislation. And while we are changing the legislation, I'm sure we'll do that because the state doesn't have any other choice. We need to give business the possibility to operate. We need to use all the mechanisms which exist. Also, there are some other things which will be easy to implement. First of all, it's prohibition of criminal persecution till the moment when tax commitment is agreed on. Basically, that is something that is used to blackmail business, and we can say that the criminal case can be filed only after the tax commitment was agreed on and not paid during 10 days. And the second important thing is when business, for example, committed some technical mistake and the business recognizes additional liabilities and they pay to the budget, and that is not using, not imposing fines, because the payer agrees that it's the case and the payer pays these additional taxes, and then no fines should be applied to such a payer. Thank you. My next question will be to Oleksandr. I've been listening to you, to the head of your party. On Friday, Arseniy Yatsenyuk was talking a lot about his vision of the development for the future. It's increasing the social responsibility of big business was one of the major things that the Prime Minister stated. Can we look at text part of the text section of the parliamentary coalition agreement? From the point of view, what will be the messages to big business? What will be changed? I'm a young MP, but I worked a lot on taxation before. Practically all my life I've been working on that, and taxes are to be paid not only by small business but also by big business. And that is what needed to be done. There are different types of reform. When we took a character and the character was passing the test had two criteria: to find as many mistakes and correct them, and the second was not to add new mistakes. The second criteria is more important when we are talking about reforms. In military times, you need to be very careful. You cannot experiment with the economy, with people, especially when the time is the time of war. Business is not requesting reduce the rate. The Yanukovych's band was offering the reduction of rates, taking taxes from legal to illegal sphere. They were trying to reduce the VAT, but they wanted to collect more. They reduced this income tax from 25 to 15, and that is 7%, that is 28%, and the tax plan goes up. They need to collect more. Basically, they were taking the taxation from legal to illegal sphere, and then we get surprised when the payers pay taxes, but not where they should have paid. They had problems, and the executor says collect more with smaller rates. It's not taxation. It's not the system of taxation. If big companies were paying like small companies are, everything would have been better. In simplified taxation companies, they they work without envelopes. Everything is so simple with them. And big companies, when they were offered up to 20 million, if you get up to 20 million, then switch to single tax where the tax is 5 plus VAT, then 7 without VAT. What do you think? For a long period of time, out of those who received this opportunity, 64 companies only switched to this system. They do not need any single tax. They resolve their problems cheaper. Even 5 and 7% for them is a lot. We cannot say that the single tax is where everyone wants to be. We invited them to this, and they don't want to. When people say that in Ukraine we have this social law offshore for you and single tax for us. Well, basically, single tax is not a way to avoid taxes. Don't touch us and we'll pay much more than so-called normal ones pay. We will not pay to accountants, we will not have any risks. And don't take them, don't press them, don't tell them, don't threaten them. Why are you scaring them? They will go into the shadow. It will be impossible to take them out. When in the beginning Yanukovych was saying there will be the tax code without simplified system, then the people ran from this system, but those who ran away from that system, they did not want to come back. And so don't scare, don't threaten. We just can ruin the whole system. Allow them to live and don't kill the single tax. It's not just the system of taxation which is based on it. The cheap goods are based on that. The real incomes are at least growing somehow. Because in real economy, to earn 1 hryvnia, a person has to spend 2. So, and when I buy something, I spend 1 hryvnia per hryvnia. And only with a single tax makes it beneficial to buy not just Chinese goods, but our own goods. And that is also the social function. That means employment. And not a single tax is to be blamed that we have this stupid SSC. They invented this 35%, and then they invented that if you unofficially 1 million, then you pay this tax from the first several thousand. For the first 21,000, and they don't pay anything. But basically, the poor person pays more than an oligarch. Do you think that everyone will go to pay 31 or 27%, and oligarchs do not pay? And I'm happy that in coalition agreement, I believe the coalition agreement is not a toy. We agreed to that today and then we cancel it. So if it's in coalition agreement that there will be no special accounts, that means that all parties understand that these VAT accounts are dangerous. VAT accounts allow to take VAT out of Ukraine so that people stop paying VAT. But people will be just paying single tax. It's a strange way of fighting VAT. Together with VAT, you can bury the whole country. We have these big tax pits, but we decided that the tax pit will be covered by honest taxpayers who pay VAT, and normal taxpayers will not be able to operate. What is the proposal? The fact that it was proposed, it's a diagnosis. When they offer such a lethal medicine to the country, they basically propose these special accounts. The devil is in details. The devil is in VAT. Alexander Viktorovich, the coalition agreement has an item on transfer taxation. Could you say a few words about that? And we also remember how much effort the Prime Minister was putting into growth of rent payments in 2014. I have not found that in the draft coalition agreement. Help us understand it. I can tell that the transfer articles of tax code are not for Ukrainian legislation. They are implemented from the legislation of the countries where there was a norm. If the reports are not submitted, then 5%. And here, this fine scared everyone, but transfer pricing has two sides. On the one hand, it's all related to normal prices. Either if we go to Europe, then it should be like in Europe. They need to achieve the transfer level. But if they do not reach this level, then it should be according to the law, which says that the price of agreement is the regular price, but the tax officials do not see that the regular price is the price of agreement. They don't see that, and we have to prove it in the court. And the special accounts just deteriorated the situation. There are so many monopolists in the country who will not submit their documents, and there are so many nuances that will bury it. There is a law and resolution, but without the mechanism, it will not be able to operate. But what to do with the supplier? If the supplier is monopolist, we do not understand what to do with this monopolist. No one is afraid if they come with inspection. There's no mechanism, but there is the fear, and we need to cancel the fear. We are discussing the issue of big capital, coalition agreement, rent payments, and transfer pricing. Oksana, Vladimir, Andriy. Talking about transfer pricing, what we meant in the draft agreement. First is canceling exceptions. When the law was voted for under the government of Azarov, there are some sectors which will not be covered by transfer pricing. And the second one is to make cheaper the control over transfer pricing, because now the situation is that the taxpayer is trying to provide reporting, but the state cannot receive all these reports because of the volumes of documents. It all should be objective, and it all should have its own price. And if the reporting on transfer payment is so expensive and so complicated, that is not correct. So the first component is transfer pricing without exceptions and making cheaper the accounting, to give ability to the state to control how, but all the parameters are identified correctly. And rent payments, they are in coalition agreement, they continue what you have mentioned, and they are in the part on the energy supply and energy sector. It's about rent payments and the coalition agreement. Will it be at the same level as in 2014? There are no figures set there, it's just the direction. We just set the direction, and when the specific laws are passed, we will talk about what should be the percentage. The rent payments are to correspond the cost of goods and price, international price in the market. I would like to say that the position of RPR group on transfer pricing is Ukraine is not ready to such instrument. Why we have this simplified taxation, and it works well because it's simplified taxation. Such difficult things as transfer pricing and income tax doesn't work. So we took the experience of such countries as Mexico. They, for many years, had the income tax, profit tax, and now India is doing the same. And Ukraine could be compared not to European countries where they have this transfer pricing and they can afford such difficult mechanism, but we could be compared with such countries of developing world. Thinking about our level of corruption, the work of our tax services, otherwise we look like one character in a famous Soviet novel. So when we are trying to take these, to implement such complicated mechanisms, we cannot cope with that. So basically this mechanism does not make it, makes impossible or not necessary any schemes which could be invented by the payers, because the payers will always invent some scheme. And the recipe is very simple. If you receive a profit and you distribute it, you pay dividends. From the dividends, you pay tax. If you do not and distribute it. If you reinvest it or you hide it, then you just pay a certain percentage. And we have not finished this discussion on how much should be paid. But the principle is that the tax is paid based on what assets the company has. The companies which have some big land, a lot of land, they have the opportunity to avoid taxation. But if it has nothing to do with real profit, if the company doesn't earn any profit, they will have to pay tax. But with this system, the tax administration comes and they're not interested in whether the person earns or not. The profit tax has two drawbacks. Profit is what you can manipulate. And whatever you write about the control of expenditures, but if the company is interested in showing the profit like in RON, then they will be showing it. If they are not interested in showing the profit, they will hide it. And the second drawback, and our budget expenditures, most of them are fixed expenditures which are not protected, and it's better to have stable tax. If we look at a normal company, normal commercial company, then it's worth having assets if the assets are bringing profits. If this is a Soviet type director, he has a plant that does not bring any profit, and this director does not understand how it could be sold. But if this is like a company that regularly does not get any profit from the assets, then there is a suspicion that such company hides the profits. And this rate will be like 1.5%, and it's much smaller than the tax which would have been paid from the profit which assets are to bring in our conditions. We can argue about that, but we need to move forward. And Andriy, I have such a dual impression. Thank you, Andriy. Thank you, Oksana. Thank you, Oleksandr. We hear in your words a lot of hope. But on the other hand, I believe that in today's discussion, myself and Valeriy, we represent business. We are from business, not trades, is what the business is concerned about. It's the deregulation, the economic reforms in the country. We're talking about middle class. The middle class is not just small business, it's management of large business with their problems. And I would like to draw your attention to the following. First, it is impossible to talk about tax reform separate from the reform in general. For example, I need to understand what will happen to my money. Business which forms the middle class, this business got used to the tax from turnover 13 plus 3. And now when we're talking about how to rescue this situation, about all these technologies of reducing the SSC rate, that's also the game of rescue. But looking at Georgian experience, what was good there? The Georgian reformers agreed on how to modernize tax system for many years ahead, and they showed to the business the perspective. Unfortunately, well, now we are talking about how to rescue the situation. We are not showing the picture of the future. We do not give the signal for increasing attractiveness, investment attractiveness of the country. We don't have the stock market in the country. And the second thing we do not have is credits for small and medium-sized business. Small and medium-sized business was accounted for 10% in 2013. We see that the middle-sized business is dying in the country. We don't have it. Many markets reduced twice or three times. Few markets preserved their positions. The reason why this is happening is, first of all, non-readiness of authorities to be open to business community, like Vladimir has already mentioned that. Novokraina, RPR, Big Four, Association of Accountants and Auditors, starting from April or March, they've been working on tax reform. We have achieved consensus. Andriy, Oksana, Alexander, a big request to you, please involve us into your work. We're ready to work together with you. Now we see 18% yes. But with VAT accounts, that was a disaster. And I'm finishing. We will do something when economy stops to be economy of eating up. We could see that until 2014. A small growth of GDP was turning not into investments, but into new cars and so on. But we need to create the investment opportunities in the country. I would like to thank all those present, those people who are not MPs yet, because we do hope that the projects which are to be passed will be developed by experts. Also, I am a chief expert on economics in RPR, and what is prepared there goes to the parliament. But give us projects, give us draft laws. Unfortunately, today we have just concepts, but you cannot bring concept to the parliament. We are open, we are ready to work on different concepts, but we need draft laws to take them to the parliament. Don't wait that business and professional community will bring draft laws. Let's agree about how to distribute the roles. We can prepare the concepts, and together with you, we can make a draft law, but don't wait from us the draft laws. I will not argue with you, because VAT accounts, that's a story of concepts. It is important not to give a concept, but specifically how this should be done. Because the VAT accounts, that's a concept which was used by fiscal body. Because you can put a comma after different words, and civil servants know how to do that. The expert community does not know how to do that. We are open, we are interested in changing conditions, but for that we need specific documents. The Cabinet of Ministers is to be formed of people who will be ready to vote for decisions but not concepts, and that's important. That's a big difference between them. It is important to have the solution, not just the advice. We are working. We have always been open. That's mine. I'm talking about myself. Expert activity, that's my environment. But what we need specific solutions. And also, what today? Today we have less small and medium-sized business. That is because of many things that affected it. Several years of those who were in power. Unfortunately, the situation we have in the East, the lack of export, because small business also pushes out small business. Our task is to create conditions for development of small and medium-sized business. Let's work on that together. The MPs are the conductors of the positions. We're saying that the MPs will be the engines who will bring to the parliament and push via the parliament all these ideas that we will develop together. We have used all the time. I give 1 minute to Oleksandr and Vladimir. I would like to explain why it's about all these details. When we were drafting laws in alternative Rada, and the MPs were saying, okay, we're ready, but write it according to our rules. I spent time for that. That wasn't too much work. Why I did it? I didn't say do it yourself. I give you an idea. Thank me for idea. If they did it, it would be worse. The author has to finalize it because otherwise they bury something. So I spent half a day, but for that to look like a draft law, I did it. It wasn't passed, but it scared many. We hope that now the MPs are not the enemies to the civil society, but representatives. Don't convince me that we need to prepare draft laws. But the problem is, I have been in this business for 17 years. To write a draft law is a serious professional work, and serious professional work, requires a serious and professional payment. And I'm surprised when in 2005 I worked for the money of donors. The government wasn't ready to do anything, but they paid for that. And now all this money of the donors, they are used for anything but not for writing draft laws. I've known Vladimir for many years and we help each other always, but talking about these draft laws, Eduard is one of the organizers of Tax Maidan. And then people were also doing it. And today talking about these draft laws, in many cases they were prepared by experts and activists. The specialists can do it, but the question is different. If you have an idea, no one will write this idea but you. And talking about payment and non-payment, I don't want to discuss it even. Thank you. I know that people have questions. We are sorry, but this will. You may ask questions after the round table. There were many things, interesting things. You will have time here to talk privately. We have time for that, you can do that. I would like to thank all the participants, and I do hope that in a few months I will see you here and we'll be talking about what has been done, and we'll be talking about how all these things are working. That would be a great message for business and for world community. Thank you.